When a lot of people think about firefighters, the first thing that comes to mind is them running into a burning building. You know, the phrase where everyone is running away from the emergency and the firefighters are running in. And I have to say that that is one of the most fun things about being a firefighter, is showing up to a scene of chaos and being able to go right into the thick of it, put the fire out, perform a rescue. But before a firefighter does that, we have to do a size up on the incident. And when we do the size up, we're taking a look at a whole bunch of factors: how big the fire is, what is the life risk involved, etc. And sometimes, as firefighters, we decide not to go in. I'm going to explain to you today why that is the case. So when we're doing our size up, one thing that we are picking as firefighters, and this would fall on the shoulders of the firefighter who's in charge or the officer, is he is going to pick a strategy for that fire. There's three primary strategies that we use in my department and are fairly widespread across the industry. The first is an offensive strategy. Offense, think we are going to the fire. So we get on scene and the firefighters make entry into the building to go find the fire, go put out the fire. The second is a defensive strategy. So that is where we are staying on the exterior of the building or in a location where there is minimal risk to firefighters. The reason we would do that would be for two reasons. First, there's no significant life or property to be saved. And the second would be, it is simply too dangerous for firefighters to make entry. And the greater likelihood is that we are simply adding victims to that call versus saving any lives. And those added victims would be, unfortunately, us, the firefighters. The third strategy that that officer in charge can decide to take is what we call a transitional strategy. So in order to perform an offensive strategy, you need a certain number of firefighters on scene to do that safely and properly. Now, if you get on scene and there's not enough firefighters to perform that offensive strategy, you can declare what's called a transitional strategy, where you start defensive with the resources you have, and then as soon as additional firefighters arrive on scene, you switch that from a defensive to an offensive strategy. The reason why we call it a transitional strategy versus just switching defensive to offensive, because you can switch that at any time during a fire. The reason why we label it a transitional strategy is so that every other firefighter arriving on the scene has in their mind, hey, this first in engine, they want to make entry to this fire, but they don't have the resources required. So it just puts a little bit of, fire, as it were, in the oncoming units so that they know that, hey, we need to get there on scene quickly, and we need to get ready to go to work right away. So let me talk a little bit more about that defensive strategy when firefighters decide not to go in. I mentioned already that there's two primary observations that we make when we decide, actually, you know what, we are not going to go into this fire. The first one, as I said, is that there is no viable lives or property to save. So if we get to a house fire and there is a fire coming out of every window on both floors of the house, unfortunately, we would call that survivability profile extremely low. The chance of someone being in that house and still being alive is simply not feasible. Because of that, we are not going to put firefighters in a position of risk to their own lives to save something that cannot even be saved, right? And then the second one of that first part is that if there's no savable property. So a common one that we come across in my jurisdiction would be something like a barn fire, right? So if you get called to a barn fire in a rural area of your town, chances are it's been burning for a little bit before you've gotten there, right? Maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes before the first fire engine arrives on scene. Well, unfortunately for a barn, pretty much every part of that barn is going to be on fire. There's no life safety risk because people are not living in the barn. There could be property risk if the fire was small still, but since the fire is so large, the insurance company is just going to come in afterward and say, you know what, we're going to tear this barn down. We're just going to build a new one. There's nothing really to save. So if we come up on one of those scenes where either there's no survivable lives at play, or, you know what, all the property that's involved, a building, is so far involved in the fire that it's just going to be torn down anyway, we are not going to put our firefighters at any significant risk in order to put that fire out. We're going to contain the fire, we're going to put it out, but we're going to do that from a defensive point of view. Now, the second major category when we are deciding as firefighters not to go in, and it is related to the first one that I mentioned, but it is simply that the risk to firefighters is too great. Now, I want to dispel a bit of a misconception here. When we think about, that moral conflict, that you would imagine a firefighter would go through about like, hey, should I keep pushing forward or should I not keep pushing forward? I can hear a voice in the back bedroom, but I decide not to go for it. Those are really not common circumstances that we have to factor in. The reason being is, think about me when I'm wearing all my protective firefighter gear. I am wearing literally the industry best fire equipment on the market. So if I get into a situation where it's too hot for me, there is no survivable life, unfortunately, beyond that point. And it's not a situation where I can just, sit in there and hum and haw and be under this great moral dilemma. You hit that wall very quickly. You're in a room, it blackens out, it gets hot, and I mean it gets really, really hot. You're not in the mind frame of, oh, I think I can keep pushing. It's that survival instinct kicks in, and it's like, you know what? No, this is too hot for anybody to survive. If I can feel it through my fire gear, which is worth thousands of dollars and is tested industry standard, if I can feel it through that fire gear, unfortunately, there is no unprotected human life that would be survivable. And so it's actually a very quick decision in those moments. And I've been in some hot fires where you're in there and it gets very hot. Maybe you haven't cleared the room yet, but you know what? I have to get out of here. And after the fact, and I've been on these fires too, perhaps there's been a fatality and you think about that and that weighs on your conscience. But when you look at it objectively, deciding not to go in or deciding not to go in further in the moment as a firefighter can be just a very black and white decision. It's like, I cannot physically go forward. If I stay in this room any longer, I will become another victim. And those are the decisions that have to be made in the fire service. So that is a brief summary of why sometimes firefighters, we don't go in. If there is no savable life, if there's no savable property, or if the risk to firefighters is so great that we are almost guaranteeing adding victims to the call, we as firefighters will make the counterintuitive decision to stay on the outside of the structure and fight it defensively.